next honoree, she's a regular fixture at the Chicago Federation of Labor monthly delegates meeting. Like our other honorees this evening, she's a fighter for workers. She's been one her entire life. To introduce our next honoree, please welcome Julia Berkowitz with the Illinois Labor Institute.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I first met Roberta Wood, or Bobby, as many know her, about 10 years ago on Facebook. Then tradeswomen everywhere were forming online groups to break out of our isolation, to find and support one another, and to share the myriad challenges and experiences we confronted on the job. As well, the women in my local, IBW 134, hoped to resurrect a women's committee that never quite got off the ground in the 90s. As for me, I was finishing up my last semester in school and working, and looking for a research topic that can encompass all these issues. As you'll see in the program book essays, Bobby was a co-founder of the District 31 Women's Caucus when women were flooding the mills for the first time since World War II. She and a handful of others grasped immediately the problems women faced and understood what needed to be done. It's as if Bobby hit the ground running as soon as she hired him in 1974. The Women's Caucus under Bobby's leadership drew attention to issues like gender and reproductive health discrimination, like discouragement and obstacles in job retention and access to skilled apprenticeships, like race discrimination and probationary firings, poor training and occupational segregation, the need for child care and adequate locker rooms, and broader legislative activity like the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment and the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, all issues which we are still dealing with today. One of the main issues the Women's Caucus organized and unified around was pregnancy discrimination. Many industries turned new occupational safety and health language on its head to justify purging women of childbearing age from high-paying union jobs out of supposed concern for their future children. This meant the loss of over 100,000 jobs for women across all industries. And these same forces never seemed nearly as concerned for women's fate when they confronted equally dangerous occupational hazards and exposure to chemicals and disease present in lower-paying traditional women's work such as textile production, nursing, teaching, childcare, and cleaning. It was only when women began acquiring the skills, the wages, and independence fiercely reserved for men that concern for their unborn babies became a hotly contested issue. Of course, the Women's Caucus argued that reproductive hazards affected both men and women. They appealed to male co-workers by insisting that to exclude women from a toxic worksite only served to leave men exposed, and called for an altering of the workplace rather than the workforce. USWA women made common cause with their male co-workers by placing the burden on management to clean up the workplace, rather than reinforce dangerous illusions that health hazards would somehow vanish if only women were driven from industry. Bobby's leadership was critical. Rather than seeking the limelight as a leader, she worked to cohere a collective that listened and gave voice to women's concerns, but also developed women to build alliances with their union brothers, and most importantly, how to take action within the union. This is difficult work now. I can't imagine doing it 45 years ago. And that's the point. We think mill closings and industrial restructuring is the end of the story, but Bobby, as so many steelworkers did, gained work in the municipal agencies throughout the region and continued her activism through IBW organizing drives. More broadly, she continues to build solidarity as labor editor of People's World, and she is a fixture for the Chicago labor movement, as Don mentioned, mentoring women workers and trade unionists, and thus guaranteeing future generations of women leaders. And it's because of this groundbreaking work that women of across all industries, and especially in the trades, have been able to make key advances, most recently with paid maternity leave being written into many contracts. The work of the Women's Caucus continues to serve as a model to women trade unionists who confront similar issues of gender and pregnancy discrimination, occupational hazards and job tracking, in a number of industries some 40 to 45 years later. They prove that women are unstoppable when we stick together. And for these reasons and so many more, I am honored to induct Bobby Wood into the Union Hall of Honor. Solidarity.
Thank you, Labor History Society, for this great honor, and also for the opportunity for a wonderful reunion. Congratulations to my fellow nominees, Norma Gaines and Vice President Redmond and Director Millsap, Secretary Treasurer Villar, Debbie Pope, Brother Dowling, and so many more friends. Now I'd like to invite you to join me in my time machine. It's Wednesday, April 16th, 1974. I live in Los Angeles, but today I pile everything I own into and on top of my old Chevy and drive 50 straight hours to Chicago, which you can do when you're 24. Well, the day before that drive, I had read in the LA Times that the country's 7 steel corporations were being legally required to hire hundreds of women in production and maintenance positions, and I wanted to be sure to be one of them. So working in a steel mill had been on my mind for a while. In fact, a couple of years earlier, I had applied to Bethlehem Steel's Southern California plant. "We can't hire girls, we don't have bathrooms," said the self-important guy in the employment office, and then he laughed. I felt mad and humiliated. By the way, have you noticed bathrooms seem to be a recurring point of obsession for right-wing corporate types right up to this day, don't they? Well, the reason the steel mills had to suddenly hire women was a lawsuit brought by the ad hoc committee, which was a caucus of black rank-and-file workers. Their lawsuit overturned the steel industry's racist hiring and seniority system, and that system also had excluded women. So the Friday morning after I arrived in Chicago, I turned up at Southworks' 89th Street gate, employment office, and I was hired on the spot as a laborer in the alloy bar mill. No mention of bathrooms this time. The steel mill was another world for all of us, women and also men. Rivers of molten metal, clouds of deadly hydrogen sulfide and carbon monoxide, sparks, giant cranes, and also looking over Lake Michigan, knowing that we, together with 7,000 other steelworkers, had built Chicago's skyline. So back to bathrooms. Among other things, we found filthy bathrooms, and some of those had been reassigned from the foreman who insisted on continuing to use them. Sexual harassment was rampant. As black women were being fired as quickly as they were hired in a revolving door. And that coincided with all of a sudden the probationary period went from 30 to 90 days. And that was a period when the union would not stick up for you. We found the union ill-equipped to respond, honestly, but how could it be otherwise? Not one woman griever, not one woman steward, not one woman officer, not one woman on any committee in our local, not one woman staff rep. Okay, and this is a situation replicated across the country and even at the national level. But the 90s were a time of rank and file upsurge. Our country's working class was energized by the social movements of the day, opposition to the war in Vietnam, women's rights, civil rights, and the labor movement itself was beginning to give power back to those movements. And by the way, just as unions played a crucial role in ending the war in Vietnam, I note that right now unions, including our own SOAR chapter here, where are they? Where's our SOAR table? Over there. Our SOAR chapter is calling for an end to the massacre and immediate and permanent ceasefire in Palestine. It can't come soon enough. So in the 70s, a big revolt was brewing in the USWA, and it centered right here in the Gary, Chicago area. This new generation didn't like the idea of leaders who were so cozy with management that they had signed a no-strike deal, who supported war and had even let the union be complicit with discrimination. I ran for trustee in my local against the incumbents. Stand up and fight, don't sit back and deal. That was the slogan. It was a shock to everyone, especially me, when the overwhelmingly male workforce elected its first woman officer at Local 65. And what I heard from my fellow workers was, let them have a chance, meaning the women. I often heard that, and I was determined not to let them down. Through the rank and file movement, women from all the steel mills, Inland, Republic, Bethlehem, Interlake, Midway, Continental Can, and many other, Hammond Valve, and many other plants, we met each other. We didn't even have the use of a union hall, but every one Sunday a month, we gathered in the meeting room of the Holiday Inn in Hammond, and we founded the District 31 Women's Caucus. We published dozens of issues of a newsletter that was distributed around our district and even around the country. So I know you heard from Norma and you'll hear it from others, but it's hard to describe the sisterhood and solidarity in our group. And even my friends who are here today, even where we haven't seen each other in years, the bonds, when you go through a war together, your bonds are lifelong. And I think we laughed more than we cried, but we certainly did both. We raised our children together, and when we were the chosen ones to get to go to an international convention, the one who did get their way paid but let the other ones stay in their room, we carpooled together, we introduced resolutions, and most of all, I think, in our meetings, we learned not with a class, but by doing, how to conduct a meeting, how to act in a meeting, how to write and introduce a resolution or a petition, how to gather the courage to speak at a meeting. We heard from Norma what happened to her, and that wasn't the only time when you get up to speak. That was a terrifying experience. Bring a group of friends with you, and then you can speak. And we also learned how to have fun. We learned the importance of black, brown, and white unity and intersectionality even before that term was used. And we had allies from the Coalition of Labor Union Women, from many other unions, from ERA and peace groups, and I'm proud that we welcomed our LGBTQ siblings into our group at a time when that wasn't common. So could I just have the privilege of asking my steelworker sisters to stand for a minute so we could recognize our February morning in 1978, while I was coming out the 86th Street gate after a midnight shift, a very handsome redhead handed me a flyer. And I could tell he was not from this area. It's February, he had no hat, no gloves, no scarf. I learned he was visiting from Alabama, and I very inappropriately asked him if he was wearing long underwear. My children are horrified by this. Now, I don't know if that's why, but a whirlwind romance ensued, and we married that same year on May Day, less than 3 months later. And our family of 4 daughters, Angela, Jessica, Megan, Karina, and 8, going on 10 grandchildren resulted. So I'm so thrilled. My one daughter rode in the train with her husband and daughter from Pennsylvania and surprised me here today. But could I introduce you to my family? My grandson, my dear friends, Melissa and Jenny, my son-in-law, Scott and Fabricio, and my daughter-in-law, Meredith. Back to the Women's Caucus. We had the benefit of lots of advice from veteran founders of the union who in those days, a lot of them were still around. And this included many communists and many civil rights leaders who had played a big role in organizing and strengthening our union. So one important thing we learned is that even though, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, workers' initial anger is always focused at the union. They're disappointed that, why did they let this happen? Our job was to direct that anger at the company, direct that anger at the bosses, aim your fire at the company. That's the basis to build strength and unity. Focus on strengthening the union. Our founding co-chair, Ola Kennedy, helped intentionally craft our caucus's program with that in mind. Our newsletter exposed the abuse of the probationary period, and we were even successful in several cases in some mills in getting women their jobs back. Sexual harassment, when we named it, which it didn't, we never even knew what it was called. You know, how could you fight it? When it got a name, we could begin to fight it. And even more, when Local 65 elected Alice Perella as president, the first woman to head a basic steel local, you can imagine how that turned the tables on that issue. Even though discrimination on the basis of sex was supposed to be illegal, the Supreme Court, in its great wisdom, said that it was okay because, according to them, pregnancy is not sex-related. Figure that out. The companies were happy to agree with that, and at Bethlehem, a pregnant worker would be immediately laid off when her pregnancy was discovered, and then it resulted in cutting off of her health benefits. So we held dances, we had fried chicken dinners, we raised money, we chartered a bus, we went to Washington, D.C., where we testified before Congress for an amendment to the Civil Rights Act. The amendment passed, and just 1 year later, I took great satisfaction in collecting disability pay upon the birth of my daughter, Jessie. She's here today. In the little bit of time I have left, I wanted to go back to the beginning of my story. So why in the hell did I want to go to work at a steel mill, you may fairly ask. And yes, like my sisters, I wanted a job where I could learn a trade, where I could make enough to have a house, raise a family, get a pension, have health care. But if you know me, that's not the whole story. So to be perfectly honest, I also wanted something else. I wanted power. I wanted a lot of power. I wanted enough power to change the way the world is run. It drove me crazy to know that even though generations of workers had accumulated innovation and scientific achievement and made things, and there was enough in the whole world that humanity had finally achieved the means to feed, clothe, house, create a beautiful life for every baby that's born on this planet. And we don't. That drove me crazy. I've always believed that it's in our workplace struggles, like the steel mills, the warehouses, Starbucks, schools, where we build the power that can make that happen for humankind. It's our collective skills and our confidence and courage and solidarity that we build in the workplace struggles. These are the machines that can replace capitalism with a society that's run for and by the working class and not by the likes of evil billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, and the Koch brothers. I can think of no higher calling than to be a tiny cog in that machine to achieve that revolution. Well, the District 31 Women's Caucus was washed away with the winds of capitalism, and many of our workplaces became the victims of corporate greed. And I can't tell the whole story of the fight back to save our jobs and communities. Many of us were forced to scatter to other jobs, other unions, and other communities. But in retrospect, I would like to think that we had a little to do with the transformation of the steel union into the fighting machine I'm so proud it is today, with women of steel at the center, with the women's conferences and committees and leaders that we so optimistically called for back then. So thanks again, Labor History Society, for always reminding us labor history isn't just our past, it's our present and especially our future. Thank you.
Congratulations, Roberta.